Senator Marks graciously offered to host this coffee and conversation, and you've got Representative Smitty Pignatelli here. These guys have spent decades in service of the county, and I really appreciate that they came to visit us here in
that is happening. We're trying to do 2 a month, and the hope is with the roving office hours, with the fixed office hours, and with the coffee and conversation, which we call refreshments and remarks, that we will get to every town once per term, if nothing else. And so on the first and third Mondays, we're going to be in Great Barrington at the town hall in the mornings. And like I said, there's a fixed office in Pittsfield, and Casey.
Not bad there.
She didn't hear us the first time either. Casey is our district director, and so he is the person who will be staffing most of the hours with me or alone at the Pittsfield office and the roving office hours that are going to be all over the place. So
more coffee next.
Yeah, I'd say. We didn't think this many people would be here.
Oops. Just making sure Zoom was on.
One of the reasons I ran for the Senate, coming from the House, and I've served in the House for 12 years as the representative for the 2nd Berkshire District, which over the years was 29 different cities and towns in Berkshire, Franklin, and Hampshire counties, was I thought it was important to build and make sure we promote the relationship that the Senate and the House of Representatives can have, and always has had locally, but to really show an impact of collaboration and really great teamwork. And so at each of these, I have the representative join me to make sure that they also know what's going on and that they're also accessible and that we're working together on every issue that comes up. And so I am honored to have the dean of our delegation, the dean of the Western Massachusetts delegation, Representative Smitty Pignatelli here as part of the conversation. And I imagine you're not shy, but if you'd like to just say a couple of introductory words, that would be wonderful.
Well, it's great to be here, and thank you very much. I'm really personally very excited about Paul. We've served together for the last 10 or 12 years. He's been a great partner in the House. We represented the 2 largest rural geographic districts in the House of Representatives, and I think that's going to bode well for an even larger district in the state Senate. But the thing I admire about Paul, when I look at the challenges that we have in the Berkshires or Western Mass, sadly, we lost a representative with Paul's seat being, in essence, eliminated, I guess. I'm now the 2nd Berkshire District. Right? Am I third? I'm third.
But you're first in our hearts.
There you go. But the thing about Paul is that I did a little history. He's the first state senator from the Berkshire since 1961 that actually had legislative experience going into office. And I think with the challenges that we have going forward, having that legislative experience, I think is critically important. So we're few in number, but by working together, we can be mighty in voice. And I think that's what we've been able to do. And Paul and I especially have worked extremely hard to try to build a 413 delegation. I always said that, we have 3 state reps in the Berkshires now, whose good thing is our primary only focus is on Berkshire County. I think that's another good thing. But when we go to Boston, there's, I think, 23 state reps in Boston. So every day we go to work, we're outnumbered on some of the key issues we're dealing with. That's why I'm trying to build a 413 delegation. We're leveling the playing field. And I think whether it be West-East Rail, rural transportation for schools, some of the impacts that some of our small towns like Stockbridge has, building that Western Mass coalition, I think is going to hopefully bode well for us. The jury's still out. We don't know. The new governor hasn't really led a lot of her agenda just yet. So we're still waiting for that to happen. There's still a lot of key positions, secretariats and commissioner appointments that have yet to be made. We haven't even seen her budget yet. That's another thing that's going to take up a lot of time over the next few months, but we haven't even seen the governor's vision for the next 18 months. And the tradition goes for the selectmen and the town administrator that are here. The House budget comes out usually the week before school vacation in April. We'll have a couple of days to file amendments. And then usually the week after school vacation, that last week of April, the House will go into full debate on the budget. Then it goes to the Senate, and then we continue to work on it, hopefully to getting it done by July 1. So we have a lot of work to do, but yet to see the governor's vision. Here we are mid-February without a governor's budget just yet. But we're moving ahead anyways, the legislature. But I'm really looking forward. I'm excited about Paul. Casey, I think is going to be a great local face and voice for Paul when he's in Boston. And I think you're going to see a lot more of him. And I think he's got a lot of local Western Mass experience as well. So I'm just here to say thank you to Paul, congratulating. And I think we're going to be a great tag team for the next few years. So.
Well, thank you. Thank you for coming. There are more cups now, I see. So if anyone didn't get coffee, please feel free to go up and at any time. It's very informal. So, it's not like school where you have to ask permission to get coffee or go to the bathroom or anything like that. And thank you, everyone that's on by Zoom. Hopefully you can hear what we're saying and see us. And when we get to the question and answer period, I don't know how we'll work it, but there is, of course, going to be the opportunity for Zoom people as well to ask anything. And I'd just like to start with saying thank you. So I had the honor of serving this region in the House of Representatives for 12 years. And I think the people of the area took a chance on a 31-year-old, and I hope it's paid dividends. I hope your investment has paid off. And I really appreciate that the people of Stockbridge sent me the great amount of support they did over the primary and over the general election. And so I'm really honored to serve. And I'm honored to have these new communities. I never had any of the South County communities before. And so when I went in the House, down in the State House in Boston, people would ask me, oh, you're the Berkshire rep. So you have Tanglewood? Nope. You have the Norman Rockwell Museum? Nope. You have Namkeeg? Nope. And now I got it all. So it's really great and it's really exciting.
So he had nothing important.
Just crane paper. I mean, that was pretty good. But so I'm really excited about this and the opportunity, along with Smitty, to showcase our area and bring senators and representatives out here so they can see what's going on. And just to let people know where we are in the legislative calendar. We were both sworn in on January 4th for the new session. At this point, we filed our initial bills. That had to be done by January 20th. And we're in a period where we're allowed to co-sponsor each other's bills. We're waiting on the budget. Normally, the governor's budget comes out by now. But because the governor's new, she gets like a bonus 6 weeks. So it could come out anytime, but she has until, I want to say like the first or second week of March to come out. Our timeline, as Smitty put out, is the same. April for the House, May for the Senate, which will be a different experience for me. I'll say going from a body of 160 to a body of 40 has been pretty interesting. In some ways, it's really cool that you get to interact, I think, more frequently and more regularly and less formally with a lot of your colleagues in the House with so many members. It gets a little tough. I'll say this. I've had the Ways and Means chair call me and I've not called him back immediately. In the House, if you saw that phone ringing and you didn't answer that, you might not talk to him again for 2 months. So it's a very different feel. And I like the intimacy and I like the collaborative sentiment I'm getting. What is daunting is how big this district is. And I personally try to still answer my emails, and to go from 42,000 people to 170,000 people emailing you is a lot to keep up with. So I was checking in on a lot of stuff yesterday on a Sunday to kind of catch up for the week and stay ahead of everything. So again, it's an honor to be here. I'm happy to see so many people here this morning, and I don't know how we want to work it, but I'm happy to serve as the moderator unless someone else wants to.
Go ahead, I'll keep an eye on Zoom.
Okay,
So
perfect.
People raise their hands.
Yeah, if you're on Zoom and you want to talk, please use the raise hand function, and then we'll try to make sure we get you into the loop. But happy to discuss anything. Again, doesn't have to be, technical, just please. Oh, and please, I'm excited to learn as much as I can about Stockbridge and about what's going on in Stockbridge, because this is a new community to me and my service. Please.
So, I'm Peter Strauss. I'm now a permanent resident. I was until recently a vacation resident. And so for me, the community division over the real estate tax exemption here over the past year has been really quite an important thing to see. And it strikes me that why there was so much division and why that statute has been so little used in its history, only 16 communities have used it, is because there is nothing in it that permits a community to set a minimum assessment level or a maximum assessment level above which it can't be used. So the result of that is that people with $2 million properties who are permanent residents are paying, let's say, $2,000, $3,000 less tax than their second homeowner neighbors who have the same assessment. So one bill that I hope either of you, or both of you, would produce would be a bill that would permit any community in the state to set a minimum assessment or maximum assessment level above which the RTE can't be used. And if you were to do that, if the state was to do that, then I believe this would be a much more available means for protecting poorer community residents who have low assessment property and who can't afford to pay their taxes.
And can you or someone walk back what the situation was that actually happened? Because I said, this is pretty,
The town,
yeah.
Patrick White, understandably, worked rather hard to get Stockbridge to adopt the RTE. But he faced quite a bit of opposition from primary residents as well as secondary residents who made their voices heard, precisely because people with $1 million properties were getting a tax break that their neighbors were not getting. And that can be avoided if if the RTE were just available below an assessment level that the community could itself set.
Patrick, do you want to add? Yeah.
I think that the policy question is, I think for many towns around here, how we encourage young families to try to be able to afford to live here. We have a tenant in this building who lives in Columbia County and on his $300,000 home pays $6,000 in taxes. So trying to, as we look at the next generation, trying to create incentives, and it's not just around taxes, it's around all these incentives that we could come up with to try to make, we know housing is more expensive here than it is 10 miles, west, but potentially lower taxes could create incentives and ability for people to be able to afford a higher mortgage if the taxes are lower. Peter makes an excellent point, though, that there was a question of fairness that actually resonated beyond what I expected, or what I anticipated, that I think was legitimate. We want to kind of target the assistance where the policy needs to be, and I think that Peter's idea of trying to kind of maybe focus on starter homes, for example, might make it a more attractive policy that people could build consensus around.
What's interesting is I've actually had this conversation. I'm meeting later this week in Boston about the AMI, the area median income, which is more of a federal issue. We shouldn't discount what hopefully the federal government could step up and do. But like Stockbridge and Great Barrington, AMI, they're in the same pool as Florida, Clarksburg, Adams, and North Adams. It doesn't make any sense. It actually skews our numbers dramatically. I mean, if we had just a South County or say Lenox South AMI, that would be a very different conversation on what's affordable and what we can be doing. You saw in Great Barrington, in fact, Paul and I were working on this. They just got I think it's a $3.9 million Mass Works grant to do a first-time home buyer affordable housing development. I'm a big proponent of home ownership. I think the only way, in my opinion, that you're ever going to break the cycle of poverty is to give somebody something to own, to build equity, to build assets and build wealth. There's a proposal in Lenox right now about a 64 unit affordable housing complex, 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units, $1,500, $2,000, $2,500 a month to rent. If you can afford a $2,000 rent, even with today's interest rates, you can afford a $300,000 mortgage. So giving me something to own, something to build assets and equity on is the way we should be going. The state, in my opinion, needs to do a better job incentivizing or rewarding small communities like Stockbridge and Great Barrington to build a subdivision of home ownership instead of building. They're talking $300,000 to $400,000 per unit to build a rental unit.
Can I just follow up?
Yeah.
The Washington Post last week did a searchable database of the entire country showing cash purchases in towns. And they didn't actually have Stockbridge because it was too small, but in Lenox, last year, 2022, 61% of the units were cash purchases. Lee, 55% of the units were cash purchases. Great Barrington, 45%. And when we have very few units available, obviously the folks who are using cash purchases to buy a home are not necessarily the young families that we need. And if you don't think this is like a huge issue around housing stock and the fact that people are, the few units we have, are not really available to folks who are going to just make a decision to raise their families here. And I think that these are really tough issues that I'm glad you guys are on top of.
Yeah, and I personally have never gotten involved in the local issues, but I love what you're doing about the accessory dwelling units
Yeah.
for that proposal to be fleshed out. I think that's a smart move. I really do. Yep.
And I'm happy to work on this to come, because we've already been talking about something about, so thank you for bringing this up, because it is something new to me. We'll go, you next, and then you.
I'm Sally Underwood Miller. You'll hear from me. Smitty hears from me regularly. I'm the chair of the CPC. I am on the Conservation Commission. I'm president of the Great Barrington Kennel Club, in case anybody doesn't know that there actually is one. And so I write whenever there's something dog related. But years ago, I was one of the founding members of the Community Preservation Committee when it first came in 2002 to this town. And we voted for the 3%. So we have a good bit of money for a town this size to be able to spend. We've spent, I think, close to $6 million over the course of our history. And one of the things that was so important to me when we first started out, in order to get people to adopt the community preservation, I stood up in town meeting and I had a spreadsheet that I had figured out of the average worker person who would live in Stockbridge, maybe work at the museum, work in town hall, be one of our firemen or police officers. You know, people hear affordable housing and they think, drug units and terrible crime and all sorts of things. So my theory was that there was this person who was earning $35,000, which 20 years ago was a fairly good salary. And I worked out, what the average person might pay for a mortgage, they might pay for a car, insurance, sending the kid to school, clothing, food, all that stuff. And by the time we were done with their absolute basic necessities, and I'm talking basic necessities, that $35,000 was gone. Mm-hmm. And that's even more so true today because so many of the houses that might have been affordable at one point are no longer because Stockbridge has become the destination point for people from Boston and New York and other places. And it's raised the property asking to such a point where even if with help from the community preservation money, we can't afford to buy those houses and make them available to people. My children cannot afford to live in this town. And I think that I'm a borner also, by the way.
You're what?
A borner. I was born in Stockbridge. It's a Nantucket term, I think. But anyway, I think it's really sad that we have so few kids, we have so few families. You look around this room and look at the color of everybody's hair, and
What's wrong with that?
Yeah, except yours. But the beard has a little.
Yes.
So I mean, we are aging out. We are pricing out, and the town that everybody touts being Norman Rockwell, Stockbridge, is definitely no longer. We can't walk down the street and know the people that are walking down the other way. It's really unsustainable. We can't. Our police don't live here. We're running out of firemen. The folks that work in the other industries in the town can't afford to live here. And I think that is tragic. And I think that it's a really, really important thing to try and figure out. And oh, by the way, if you want to be friends in Stockbridge, Tanglewood is in Stockbridge. Right.
That's why I said it.
But buy your ticket in Lennox.
Only the first 10 pieces.
That's why we brought it up.
I think you make a very good point, and I'll go back to the AMI. Like I say, to have South Berkshire lopped in by a zip code with north of Berkshire, it just drags these numbers down of affordability. So the police officer, the school teacher in Great Barrington or Stockbridge or Lenox is put into a pool of an income from North Berkshire, which is a very different animal with all due respect to them. So if we could ever change that, it's important. I personally hate the phrase affordable housing.
Exactly.
I love housing affordability.
Yeah.
I think just switching those two words breaks through that stigma that people have, that it's Section 8 housing, and it's an element that we don't want to have here. There again, that home ownership and helping people build wealth and equity, I think is paramount. The CPA money, the CPC money, I think is great. If Patrick and I, we've talked that, Lenox has a grant program for first-time home buyers with the CPC money. You guys could do the same thing. My son, I'll give you a quickie example. My son bought a World War II era house in Lee, first-time home buyer. I've, knock on wood, was in a position to help him a little bit with the down payment. The local bank gave him $15,000 as a first-time home buyer. And the only way he has to pay any of it back, and it's prorated, if he sells the house within 5 years. If that house was in Lenox, the town of Lenox would have given him $10,000 or $15,000 or $20,000. So it's a kind of a pool of money from this, there, here, and there, and maybe a family member that could actually make a difference in the down payment. Young people today, they're not savers like the people in this room here today. They're not saving the money to have the 20% down of a $300,000 house. So I think the town could play a role in this as well through the CPC money. The matching grant from the state is not what it once was with the CPC money, because Stockbridge and Williamstown for the longest time were the only towns in all of Berkshire County that even had the CPC adopted. Now Lenox does, Pittsfield does, several other communities have. So the pool from the state is getting whittled down because there's more towns who have their hand in the cookie jar, so to speak. But I think there are some things you can do at the local level. And the banks, I think the banks do a very good job. They all get money every year from the federal government for first-time home buyers. Let's develop our own local program to give people like my son an opportunity to build wealth and equity instead of dumping $2,000 a month. That's good money after bad, as far as I'm concerned. So instead of $2,000 a month rent, my son, mortgage and insurance and taxes, $930 a month. And he's building wealth.
The other thing that, I think contributes, you were saying about savers, is that the kids who have gone to college now are paying off huge student debt. And whereas when I went to college, it was $2,500.
Yeah.
It's now $60,000.
That's the other thing that drives me crazy. I mean, I bought a house. I bought the house I grew up in after my parents passed away, and I have a 30-year fixed rate mortgage for 2.75%. My daughter just paid off her student loans that were 7, 8, and 9%. That's criminal. And that's where the federal government needs to wake up and recognize that's what's swallowing our young generation. It's the cost of student debt. Paul Mark, I've heard his student debt story a million times, and I hope he shares it today because it's real. You're pushing $800 a month at one point.
Oh, yeah.
How do you afford a car? How do you afford a rent? How do you afford to buy a house when you're trying to pay off an $800 student debt a month at 7, 8, or 9%? That's just criminal. When you can buy a 30-year fixed rate mortgage for less than 3%.
Plus, they're really sneaky about it.
Oh, no, I
think
it's criminal.
You pay off the last one, not the first one.
Yeah.
So you're paying longer if you went to college for 4 years and you took out a loan for every year.
Yeah.
They're taking the money off the fourth year, and the first year is still sitting there until you get the top ones paid off. So they're extending that payment out for however long you have to pay it, which is really
No, it's criminal. We've been working on higher ed loan forgiveness for how many years?
Yeah, for that student debt has been a priority for both of us, for sure, with both loan forgiveness programs, funding of public higher ed, public of grants that are available, low interest loans, zero interest loans, and also cracking down on schools that sometimes they'll offer you like half your tuition the first year or two, and then that disappears. And you're 2 years in, so you need the credits, you need to finish there. And so then now you start taking on more debt in year 3 and year 4. And never mind if you don't graduate. If you don't graduate, you take on all the debt, but you don't get the benefit of having the degree that's going to help you get the higher income and the better paying job. And then, what Smitty's talking about is, without getting into that, I used to be part of a marriage that had over $800 in student loan payments to make every month. And so that was more than our mortgage, that's more than car payments. It affects every decision you make, including where you're able to live and what job you're able to take. And so when we want our kids to come back out here and let's say you go through law school and you're facing $100,000 in student debt because you've taken 7 years of debt for college to get this opportunity to have a better job. And you're offered a great job in either the district attorney's office or in the criminal defense department or in some kind of a public advocacy lawyer or any kind of local law here in the Berkshires, and you're going to make $45,000, $50,000. Or you can come work for GE. Everyone hates GE, right? You can come work for GE corporate offices and you can make $150,000 in Boston. Like, where are you going to go? You have no choice but to take that job. And back to something about housing specifically. In terms of, student debt, the million costs can be an impediment to saving money, having a down payment, and then affording housing. And also the governor, something she did say in her inaugural speech is that housing is a priority for her. And she's looking at programs to both fund housing affordability and to also take advantage of state-owned properties that could be converted into housing units instead. So state-owned properties that aren't under any really great use right now. And so I can even see opportunities for that as locally as Pittsfield to maybe take some of the burden off of us. Because if houses here are going for $500,000, $600,000, that's a bargain in New York. That's a bargain in Boston. So you have to alleviate that pressure. And you have to create as many different options for people to take. But so, something very important. And I think there is actually a good opportunity for something tangible to happen in the next 2 years. Yes, sir.
Stockbridge has recently started an affordable housing trust. Randy Warner is here, who's chair of it. She's over behind the speaker's platform. We've seen that the Healy administration, in some of its initial discussions about its intentions, was really pushing the idea of affordable housing, proposing some new pots of money. And I was wondering if you can give us any guidance as an affordable housing trust, where we might pursue some of that, if there are any opportunities that are new that we can take advantage of and whose door we would knock on to pursue that stuff.
I think we'll know an answer by the summer. At this moment, she's proposed a bond bill for immediate needs, a bond bill for Chapter 90 road money, and a supplemental budget. So when we see that first budget proposal for the full fiscal year, I think we'll have an idea, and then we can, the beauty of the budget coming out and having a little more time normally and having that full month of March and month of April and then May to go over it is, as we see what she suggests, how do we in the House and Senate kind of adapt it to what is a local need or what would be beneficial. So I think we should reconnect. I think there's going to be opportunities, but it's just too early at this moment to know, but let's definitely stay in touch.
Can you state your name for me? We're going to do this like town meetings.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Mark Mills, 15 Cherry Street, Stockbridge.
The other thing I can quickly add is I think it's really important that we weigh in as small communities. Too many times in government, they want to fund I'll call it the 64 unit development in Lenox or the 150 unit in Pittsfield or some bigger city. Imagine what 10 units in Stockbridge would do. That'd be dramatic. Imagine what 5 could do in West Stockbridge, 3 in Alford, 25. And so it's going to be kind of a patchwork quilt of potential that sometimes we want to just reward the big dog. And we maybe just having a little impact in some of these smaller communities. So recognizing the problems with housing in our small towns are just as important as the big communities. Pittsfield, Springfield, Worcester, Boston, you name the city, and that gets a lot of attention. And developers love to go into a community to build 500 units. You don't want 500 units in Stockbridge. So there's got to be a different kind of reward for someone who wants to build 10 in Stockbridge.
Well, are those legal restrictions on the numbers or marketplace?
I think it's marketplace, and I think it's, I talked to a developer last year, and I was trying to see if he could, come out here and look at an old mill in the Berkshires. And he says, we're so busy, Smitty. I said, I can't look at unless it's got 150 units. I said, well, we don't have that kind of land to build 150 units. The infrastructure's not there. He said, well, don't you have any empty 5 or 6 story building? No, we don't have that either. So Pittsfield has done pretty well. because of the old banks on North Street, and they've turned into housing, 3 or 4 story buildings. We don't have that in our small towns. So trying to do what Great Barrington is doing in Housatonic with that brand new subdivision, how many units are, do you know offhand, Mike?
Don't know.
I think it might be like 30 units, first-time home buyers. There's 3 or 4 duplexes, and the others are single-family homes. Give me something that I can own, integrate me into the neighborhoods that we already have, and that stigma goes away as well at the same time. So recognizing the value of small towns and the needs of the small towns are really important. When the Governor Baker filed the Commonwealth Housing, I think that's what it was called, he put $300 million in for first-time home buyers. Oh, man, that's awesome. This is great. Then I read the details, only for gateway cities. Well, the only gateway city we have in Berkshire County is the city of Pittsfield. So if I grew up in Lenox or Stockbridge or Great Barrington or wherever, I want to live where I want to live, not where you're telling me you have to live because that's where the program is beneficial. So there again, make it for everybody. Find a program. I applaud you for having the trust developed. I think that's really important. And like Paul says, when the details come out of this new governor's initiative on what this is going to mean, I think there's got to be money. I would love to see it tiered by population. So gateway cities, here's your pool of money. 10,000 to 20,000 population, here's your pool of money. Under 10,000, here's your pool of money. I would love to see something like that.
Yes, please.
I'm Christine Rasmussen. I live on Sargent Street. And I am so glad to see you both this morning. It's so good to be able to have these open communications and hear from the community. So thank you very much for coming. I am on the BRPC as a representative from Stockbridge with Nancy Sosha. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention a couple of our priorities, which tie in so beautifully with everything you're saying, but requires BRPC to be funded in the budget at a level like those communities in Boston, because the Boston area. I was on the Regional Planning Agency, MAPC, and the money they just funnel in is amazing. And yet BRPC is right there fighting for our communities. And one thing that is on our priority list right now is to be able to continue to have remote opportunities for meetings without a whole lot of additional regulations that small towns cannot afford. And I know there are a lot of bills that are being proposed to extend the remote meeting opportunities. But when you live in Stockbridge and there's a meeting in Pittsfield, it's wonderful to be able to participate. And I think we see it in our town participation in meetings. While they might not actually be at the meeting, they will watch it and then they'll respond at another meeting. So I think that that is really important. I think also we don't have planners in every community here like they do in Boston, and they get grants because they have planners that can write grants. The District Technical Assistance Program, DTLA, that is coming out in the budget is critical for these small towns. I know we've taken advantage of it in this town, and it really, really makes a difference. So I think that that is important. I think also when you look at what BRPC is doing, we're doing a lot of studies. We're the group that can give you the background information, as you know, because you've used it. But we need funding, staffing, it's expensive. We have very dedicated people, but so if, you can increase that budget, it's going to be really important, particularly for the people in these towns that are so different. And really, like, one of the issues we're looking at is that working in a municipality in an administrative job has not been very appealing because we have wonderful town managers who stay in their positions. We have numerous other jobs that are filled by people that have been in their positions for years. We are doing a survey right now and saying, in your town, how many people are going to retire within the next 5 years? And our town manager was helpful in reviewing this survey before it went out. But we need to start figuring out a way to get people in the pipeline to be able to have the experience. So when a town manager position comes up, or we've got the water and sewer department here that are getting, their chiefs are getting close to retirement, we're going to be able to need to have people in the pipeline. And one of the things we're looking at, for instance, could we get money to have interns working with 3 towns on perhaps being an assistant town manager, so they get to know the job. And then when there's an opening, we have a locally trained person, because our salaries cannot compete, as you know, with the Middlefield trying to find a town manager. Middlefield's my hometown, so.
You're a Warner?
Oh, yeah. But, you know, but, you know, they desperately need help. It's a small town. They don't have a budget to pay. And so those are all issues that I know you're aware of, and we're very, very appreciative, because we know we can call on you. You're right there and you're advocating for us. So I want the public to know how valuable you are, but I also want to encourage you to keep your voices strong.
Thank you. Thank you for all of that. You're looking at 2 of the, not only the biggest districts, but the most rural representatives of the entire legislature. I think I was the only representative that came from a town of fewer than 1,000 people, and I'm pretty sure I'm the only senator, maybe ever, that came from a town of less than 2,000. I'm the first small town one since Jack Fitzpatrick, from right here in town. So, and Lennox is only 5,000 people, right? That's you've got to be first or second smallest town in the state.
And he was the only rep from a town that didn't have broadband.
Yeah, I was the only one without broadband for 10 years. It was crazy.
But thank you for what you're doing, and I want people to know it's appreciated, and because sometimes it's an organization that's not heard of very often.
Right. No, and thanks for the work that you do on behalf of the town with the organization. We've been trying to get more active with BRPC. I had a meeting with Laura last week.
Yes, and she's fabulous. She's our economic development.
Yeah, she had a couple of.
SIDS report, if anyone wants statistics, they should look at the SIDS report, because they just got it approved in February 3rd, something like that. So, yeah, she's excellent. So, and she told me how much she appreciates.
Oh, good. That's good.
You're taking time, because we recognize, you know, and Smitty's been involved for.
I'm actually meeting with her this afternoon.
Oh, you are?
Actually, great. That's great. That's really good.
Yeah. But you got to get the towns to, you know, when county government got eliminated in 2000 or 2001, that was kind of a legislative body representing all 32 towns. Berkshire Regional Planning kind of is that, but they have no legislative teeth. You know, I actually proposed 20 years ago to raise their assessments. I don't know, do you know what Stockbridge pays offhand to the BRPC for your assessment?
It went up 5% and it's.
$1,800. Yeah, it's not.
Nothing.
You could double that and you would still get a great benefit from that. You know, Kate's on the planning board. I mean, I cut my teeth on the planning board. We leaned on regional planning a lot to help us with that technical stuff. I had a full-time job. This is trying to volunteer to be on the planning board. You could have doubled Lennox's assessment at that time and we still would have benefited from it. But at that time, regional planning didn't want anything to do with it. We're trying to get them more money, but we got to get towns to kind of buy into this long-term vision too. I mean, we're a lot of gray hairs, Senator, but we're aging in place. We're not attracting young people to be here. There's plenty of jobs here, plenty of jobs.
Also volunteer, which is a problem. I mean, we look around our volunteer boards and most of us are upwards of 50, if not 60, 70.
The boards, think volunteer fire departments, volunteer ambulance squads, you know, that is shrinking as well. So I think we have to look at this thing very differently. I look at Lennox. I don't include Pittsfield or North Adams because those are cities. Lennox is the only town that I'm aware of that has full-time paid 24/7 police, fire, and ambulance. That's a trend we're going to if we're not careful. Stockbridge doesn't have an ambulance squad. Stockbridge has a fire chief. Lennox is a full-time fire department. We still depend on volunteers. They have a full-time ambulance squad. How much longer can that go on? As I say, the towns have to recognize the value of that, but how much can they afford? Can you afford a full-time ambulance squad in Beckett or Mount Washington or Egremont? That's why I think the shared services, and I've been working actually with Fairview Hospital the last few years about a hub and spoke model for ambulance service, so that we have a facility, say in Beckett, that would cover Beckett, Otis, Washington, and Hinsdale. And then we'd have the Southern Berkshire ambulance that would cover, Sheffield, Egremont, and Mount Washington. And then we would have, say Lennox, just for conversation's sake, that would cover Stockbridge, Lee. But Lennox is spending $30 million to build a public safety building. Lee is exploring the possibility of a $30 million public safety building. These are towns of 5,000 people. Is Stockbridge next?
I have smaller towns that are asking for it already too.
Yeah.
Smitty, can I comment on that? Kate Fletcher, I'm chair of the planning board, and, you're basically talking about shared services here, right? So I think when you're looking at shared services, it's important to recognize we already, we have an example of where it has not worked between Lee and Lennox.
I disagree.
And then, you need to look at what makes sense, potentially, having a shared fire ambulance. But I think, there are other contexts where it might not be practical.
I think Lee and Lennox work beautifully. I would strongly disagree. That was an example that it can work. It was proof that it can work. The town manager's personal family situation caused a lot of stress that he didn't need. And he was doing it for the same amount of money that Lennox was paying him for. So it showed me that it does work. We have to have the vision at the local level to not be afraid to go down that path.
Except there are conflicts potentially.
There's no conflicts.
Well, what do you do when one town's proposing something that doesn't work for the neighboring town?
You're hiring one person. You still had your board of selectmen in Lee. You still had your board of selectmen in Lennox. You still had your town meetings in both towns. Those were the governance. You just hired me to be the figurehead. And I'm going to do whatever my bosses tell me to do. It's like your town administrator. He works for the board of selectmen. He's only going to do what his town meeting says to do. So I don't see any conflicts there at all. And there was no conflict in Lennox and Lee, as far as I can see.
That's just, just to comment, of course, I don't have the background story on a family situation, of course, but I did hear from a number of people that they felt that, this was a concern of theirs. And at a certain point, perception is reality. So if people are concerned, I think I'm just saying, I think that's something to consider.
I don't disagree with that part, but both towns at their town meetings agreed to continue that to continue the agreement. So some people in this room may not be happy with some of the stuff that we're talking about today. But when the town meeting validates and renews that contract, that tells me that it was working.
I just wanted to clarify, we are already in a shared service agreement around ambulance.
Yep.
And around Tri-Town Health.
Yep.
And discussions are ongoing around other kinds of things, whether it be water, sewer, fire. These are not topics that the town is ignoring. And I think that as we look at the next 5 or 10 years, maybe sooner, we're going to, partner with our neighbors to try to make sure that we can deliver the best services at the best price. I think that our volunteer fire department is well over 60 on average age.
Oh, great.
And so, these are real issues, and it goes back to having the next generation of folks live here. At some point.
I think we all want to maintain our own identities, and I think that's critically important. But things that aren't as sexy, sewer treatment. I mean, think about it. You need it, but Lennox is going to spend $40 million to upgrade their sewer treatment plant. Lee built a $25 million. Why couldn't we deal with some infrastructure piping and have pump stations and have one regional treatment plant? That would save everybody a lot of money. Ed Riley, the former mayor, he passed away several years ago in Pittsfield. Pittsfield was built for industry and 70 or 75,000 people in population. Well, there is no industry. They're down to 42 or 45,000 people. And he told me 30 years ago, he says, with a piping system, we could provide potable drinking water for Lennox with no problem, and I think with the pipe, we could get all the way down to Lee. Think about it. So instead of a town of 5,000 people spending $40 million, let's pool our resources, get the federal government to step in, get the state government to step in to reward regionalization, sharing of services, and defray the cost of those things. So when I flush my toilet, I don't really care where it goes. I just want to make sure it goes. You know? So those are the things that I've been saying very openly. Infrastructure, in my opinion, are the things that are going to bankrupt our small towns if we don't try to think a little bit differently. And I think that's what we have to deal with right now. You know, the Southern Berkshire School and Berkshire Hills, whether they come together or not, I'll predict that'll be a $125 million high school.
Yeah.
How are you going to pay for it?
Well, that was my question for you.
I don't know.
Is like, we have that millionaire's tax, which is supposedly targeted at schools. This is the first merger, this ultimate shared service is a regional high school. And we're talking about merging 2 regional districts, which I think is the only one that we're talking about in the whole state right now. And I think that the MSBA has committed, $48 million. And if it's a $120 million project, I think that should be at the top of the list in terms of funding from the state to make it palatable. Because right now, it's Stockbridge, West Stockbridge, and Great Barrington, which are going to bear the vast majority, over 90% of the cost of that high school. And, you know, we got 113 kids in the district, and it's a whole lot to ask from, the people in this room. And I think that, I don't know who's going to figure out how to spend that money from the millionaire's tax, but it was targeted at schools. And I would hope that this, 50% of the kids in South County don't go to college or don't finish college. It's going to be the first vocational program south of Taconic. This is really important for the region. And I hope that the folks in Boston recognize that and understand that, there's going to be some sticker shock if you leave it up to us.
I think if we were going to give you 48 cents on the dollar to build this new school, but then 2 schools come together, we should give you 60 cents on the dollar. Reward you.
Yeah.
Can we get up to
having that vision?
Double it, 92. That'd be good. Before, I meant to answer one thing, Phil, from the beginning of your question. Remote voting. Yes, remote meetings.
Yeah.
We both strongly support. When I was in the House, we did pass permanent, and then that Senate was no good and didn't only extended it till March. And so I would love it to be permanent. And in our joint rules, we extended the committee hearings to remote permanent. So people from Stockbridge and the Berkshires don't have to take 8 hours to drive into Boston and sit there for 3 hours and all of that. So it encourages, everything you said encourages people to participate. We want that to be permanent. So
It's
thank you.
really important. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Sorry, go.
So one comment I have is that I recently got my master's at University of Massachusetts.
Yay.
And one of the projects that I worked on was on the topic of, and you may not be familiar with this, but it's something I'm going to ask you to just maybe potentially look into or have your staff look into, is the topic of green infrastructure. And Deval Patrick, when he was governor, had some really exciting, innovative projects around the eastern side of the state. And this is something that I would love to see more of out here in the Berkshires. Is that, and that brings me into my next comment, which has to do with one of the things I hear most from residents in Stockbridge is their concerns with traffic speeds. And I don't know if you heard Secretary Buttigieg's comments on transportation. He was interviewed recently on the NewsHour. And he talked about sort of a whole range of initiatives at the federal level. They were interesting. He talked about, road design, addressing speed, slowing things down, and safety, and just making our roadways, they're increasing, the statistics are that there are increasing numbers of fatalities, both for pedestrians, bikers, and drivers. And so he talked about, what the Department of Transportation is doing along those lines. It would be great to see areas also south of Route 7 is the main artery, of course, south of town where it's controlled by Department of Transportation is frankly an eyesore. There are invasives just climbing all over the rails. Two bridge rails are, broken down and really unattractive. And I think it would be really nice to look at ways that communities can communicate better with Department of Transportation, such that instead of us, getting into these ongoing, really intense discussions about traffic speeds in downtown Stockbridge, how about slowing those traffic speeds up before they even get into town? So that's something that I hope you will keep in mind. Thank you.
For the green, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, just for the next question, there's some hands on this side too, just so.
Oh, okay. All right. For the green infrastructure specifically, I have been and remain the lead of what was called the Green Bank and is now being called the Climate Bank. And the idea is to set up a revolving loan fund essentially that allows the state and the federal government to invest money in green infrastructure, in green projects, renewable jobs, all of that, all over the state. The president, I think, allocated $27 billion for that. And so before Governor Baker left office, he did take my idea and put it into an existing agency in the state government, and he's calling it the Climate Bank. And so we have a bill now to kind of clarify and codify what the Climate Bank does. And the biggest thing to mention is we're trying to make sure at least 20% of the funding they put out comes to rural and climate. Of course, climate, coastal, small town coastal and rural. So this idea had previously been passed by the House of Representatives as Greenworks, and it was dedicated to the municipalities. And we made sure that 10% of it came to rural. And that was passed on March 5th of 2020. So then everything changed. So we never got it passed into law, but it's back and there's going to be money for it. And so, yeah. And then, yeah, always happy to work with DOT and the local communities to try to, and the complete streets and all of that is a ongoing thing. Yeah. So I think there's going to be a lot of money for that as well. Anything I missed? Nope. Good. I'm going to go to that side only because we haven't. Go to you, please.
Anita Schwarter, Lake Drive. So thank you both for coming. Congratulations all on your election and Smitty for the election. And I'm really happy to have you both representing the Berkshires because you're both Berkshire people. So, and as you know, I've already been in touch and I appreciate your support. The Five-Town Cable Advisory Committee is negotiating a 10-year contract with Spectrum and has asked for both of your support with that. And because, the 5 towns altogether are less than 7,000 subscribers and losing subscribers daily because of streaming services. And I understand why. But what I didn't know before was how much CTSB and community media centers across the state are dependent on the fees that are collected by the cable company. So I hit on both of you to please support, and Paul's already signed on to co-sponsor, and Smitty, we were going to talk. I found the bill in the House of Representatives, House Docket 215, which supports community media centers across the state and imposes a similar fee on streaming services, if I have it right. And part of that fee will be dedicated. There will be a dedicated streaming service fee that will go to support community media all over the state, the same as cable. So this is so important, and as you know, because of COVID, we became so attached to CTSD, and it's just so much more than I even imagined. Rich Fredericks is great, and anybody can go and get a tour of CTSD, but they need the money, and they're totally dependent right now on Spectrum, who has not been really good about making timely payments for their capital infrastructure. So as was previously mentioned, Christine, I think, brought up about the importance of the remote meetings, the Zoom meetings, especially in Stockbridge, where over 50% of our homeowners are second homeowners or senior citizens or both, or whatever. We really have grown to appreciate remote meetings. And yeah, the governor's extension goes till March 31st. But Smitty, as I had contacted you last year, because Paul, you weren't yet senator, the town of Stockbridge at our town meeting did approve the warrant article that requires all town meetings to have a remote component.
Nice.
And it passed. I haven't seen anything come back from the Attorney General's office saying that it should be added to the bylaws. I'm hoping that that happens. Does it automatically become part of our bylaws? Because you said there might be some conflict with state law.
I think if it's a local bylaw, something Stockbridge did, and the Attorney General has to sign off on all town bylaws anyways,
Right.
I think it's a brilliant idea. I see no problem with it at all.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, and that's why we love CTSB so much.
But it makes it difficult when Charter Spectrum, which is, in my opinion, a horrible company. They have no competition. There's nowhere else for you to go.
Right.
Like you say, the number of paid customers are declining because of streaming services and smart TVs and every other darn thing. My cable bill is ridiculous. I think we're almost going to be getting to an a la carte type of menu for our cable TV. But how we support our public television, I think, is really important. And I think that's what part of your 5-town cable advisory, I think it should be bigger than 5-town. I think now that Charter is all of Berkshire County, you should really be unified, maybe pull in regional planning to help solidify this collaborative 32, well, they're not in 32 towns, but with broadband now and things like that, get all 32 towns pulling in the same direction and saying, hey, this is what we need. It's not like it's Time Warner down here and it was Charter in Pittsfield and it was something else in West Stockbridge and something else in Hinsdale. It's now one big company, so let's get all pulling in the same direction.
Right, and Pittsfield is next in contract negotiations, so it's really important for us to set a good example. I mean, there are things we can't negotiate, like the cost, but we are asking for that, like you mentioned, a la carte.
So fighting for public television, I think, is critically important, but also making sure you're signing a 10-year contract.
Right.
And it's my biggest fear with our broadband initiative is that 5 years from now or 10 years from now, we're going to be dealing with outdated technology. So we need companies that are willing to invest in the next generation of technology, just so we can keep this thing going forward. Otherwise, 10 years from now, we'll be scratching the geez, we're 5 years behind already. So.
Right, exactly, because we're trying to get them to broadcast in high definition. The CTSB broadcast to correct their cable guide. You can't find out what time this meeting is going to be shown unless you go to CTSB's website. And that Cablecast app is excellent. And, streaming services are so much better, the quality, than what we're getting.
And I hope I'm not the only one in this room, but I would hope that you could negotiate commercials the same volume as the show I'm watching.
How do you get YouTube TV and Apple TV and Netflix and Hulu? They're the future. You got to get them paying into the system the same way we tax, Spectrum. Because otherwise you're going to see fewer and fewer revenues, supporting the 5 people that work in that building. I mean,
And so much of that is on the FCC. Paul and I, we've talked to Senator Markey for years. He pretty much wrote the FCC rules when he was a congressman, and that's why we're in the Albany market. We want Boston news. I don't have a problem getting Albany weather news because it's coming west to east anyways, but the ability to get Boston, Massachusetts news, I think is important. But sadly, we're in that Albany market. And we have colleagues down in the New Bedford Fall River area that are in the Rhode Island market. So it's not just Berkshires, it's a nationwide problem that the federal government, again, should try to step up and fix.
But we are entitled to one Massachusetts station, and I'm not sure whether it's Channel 22 News, which comes in on Channel 16 in standard definition. and the guy is totally wrong, or Western Mass News, which also is standard definition.
The Channel 50, New England Cable Network, that's number 50, that's out of Boston.
See, didn't even know that. Plus, they're supposed to have CTSB channels below 50 on the guide, and instead they're 1301, 2, and 3. So some people can't even get those channels.
My daughter was at the finish line of the Boston Marathon bombing. And if it wasn't for WCVB Boston, because the cell phones were being shut down, sheltered, I would have no idea if my daughter was even safe. Because I wouldn't have even known about the marathon bombing. So we need to have Massachusetts news.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's do there, then there, and then more after.
My name is Randy Warner, and we live on Interlaken Road in Stockbridge. And I serve with Mark on the Affordable Housing Trust that was just recently established by Stockbridge. So in addition to being very foresighted, Sally Underwood Miller, who is here, is to be given a lot of credit for funding in the very early days a affordable housing project here. And the town of Stockbridge meets its 40B requirements, one of the few towns actually in the county that does. However, some of those investments are now coming through their life cycle. And I just wanted to put a voice in for the preservation of these housing. It is a rental housing project. And Smitty, my profession is real estate development, and I'm really supportive of your views that we need ownership. Because with ownership, you begin to build people who will stay in your community and invest in it, both personally and financially. So my question for you is, do you have people on your staff? Because Mark and I are here today, but there's 7 of us, and we have some visions about what perhaps can be done. But like everybody else who's opened their mouth, everybody needs money. And so two good things. Our new governor is a woman, and she seems to be very committed to our little part of the world out here. And I wonder if you have staff people who are working with her staff people, because we need guidance about where to come for money. So we have no commitments or plans right at the moment for any new projects, but housing is such an important, and ownership housing. And I don't know if either of you are working on getting tax credits. You know, tax credits, the federal ones are only for rental properties, which is why we have so much rental housing. Rhode Island was the first state to actually do it for ownership. I actually did a project in Rhode Island, and we used the tax credits made it possible. But it was a condo project, and I was able to sell the units. And I built in a very, very income deprived area, I guess is one way to describe it. And it turned out to be very, very successful. And people, as a result, there's a lot of new investment in that town. Again, but I don't know if there's anything I would appreciate afterwards if there's staff people or people that you know in the state that you can help our group contact, so that we can begin to build to use lingo, a capital stack, so that we can actually build something. And I don't know whether you're working on that. I appreciate it if you are understanding what you're doing.
Casey right there is our staff person for the 32 Berkshire communities. And then we have policy people now, which I never had policy people before. So yeah, we're open for business.
We love policy, but money is more important, so.
Sure. Well, that's all on me, so.
We have a really, really good staff team, and we're happy to chat with you more and work with you, because I will say, as staff people, we need your help just as much as you need our help in getting this work done, so we can chat with you.
Well, we have a very energetic group in Stockbridge. We all don't have gray hair. And some of us who don't have gray hair do underneath. But we do actually have a wonderful young woman who's got a 2-year-old and is exactly who Patrick wants to attract to Stockbridge. She and her husband have just recently moved here and renovated a house and found a way to find an affordable housing unit for them. So there is some hope.
House they
Thank
can
you.
afford.
Yes, we will be in touch.
Good, thank you.
We're gonna go there. Sweet, yeah.
So I don't, my name's Jessica Toro. I live on Cherry Hill. I don't have an ask, but
We won't disappoint you.
I have a 9-year-old at Muddy Brook. My husband also works at Muddy Brook in the school system. We are of 2 different ethnicities, so we blend that together in our household. We also have a 30-year-old who lives in Japan who would never be able to afford to come back and live in Stockbridge. So we're kind of on, 2 spectrums of, that kind of raising kids, the kid who can't come back and the kid where we imagine going to Monument with the mold and the filtration issues and all the complications. We see that in our future. I went to Monument and it was horrible in 1990, so it can't be better now. I'm also a small business owner. I'm a women-owned business. It's been very hard to certify our business because all of the certifications are out in Boston. So we're perpetually going back and forth to renew our certification. We hire local people and we pay above market rate and offer healthcare because we think it's important. We work in the climate world. We do native habitat restoration, and we want to offer more locals the opportunity to continue to kind of use science and work in the environment kind of for the benefit of all the public. But it's very hard to get employees, to retain them. It goes into the affordable housing world. It goes into food insecurity. My husband is on the board of the food bank in Great Barrington. Not, the fact that the free lunches and breakfast will sunset this year, and thinking about all those kids who were right on the poverty level who could be pushed back into it. I mean, these are all kind of a laundry list that's been partially brought up, but not many parents of kids in Muddy Brook and Stockbridge can come to this meeting. So there's a lot of things that are worrisome about our town and growing up here and kind of thinking how to perpetuate young families and diversity and all these different backgrounds is really on my mind. I also am on the land trust board with Rich, and he'll talk about it, but we have a once in a lifetime opportunity here in Stockbridge that's coming up. And so that's on my mind. And so, and climate change, not also something that's been kind of touched on with affordable housing and green infrastructure, but just, and you were talking about the climate bank, just making sure those resources do actually come to Stockbridge, and we think about how our natural world contributes to kind of that societal benefit, that human benefit. So these are all things that are on my mind, but obviously there's not a lot of us in Stockbridge. There's not a lot of kind of young to, I wouldn't call myself young anymore, that mid-grade family that, we struggle with the school boards and like filling those positions and the mergers, it's so hard to do everything. And there's so few of us that we can't all be on every board or, do everything. So I do think a lot about my employees. We only have 3 or 4 besides the 2 of us, so we're very, very small. But I remember when we first started, there was a lot more resources for small businesses to help. And a lot of that did sunset, in the 2012 timeframe. And, how do we keep small businesses going? A lot of them started up. We need to keep them going. But also, how do we keep supporting young families around here and the people we need to staff around the world? Like my husband at Muddy Brook, they're understaffed. They just can't find people. They pay well, they have great healthcare, and they're a wonderful community. It's just, they're understaffed. We can't draw people here. So it does feel a little bit like we're 20 years too late. We had to start working before, so how do we catch up a little bit, you know? So there's no ask, there's just that little bit of perspective of our kind of tiny corner of Stockbridge and who we talk to and worry about things. And then the natural environment. I mean, I don't mind, do you mind if I have Rich just kind of explain what we're thinking and caring about?
I'll be quick. So I'm the president of the Land Trust. I'm also a resident here. I also work in town and from the Norman Rockwell Museum. And we have this tremendous opportunity. We're working with Mass Wildlife and Berkshire Natural Resources Council and the Stockbridge Land Trust to acquire about 351 acres of land, which represents the northern tip of Monument Mountain and Agawam Lake, which is, if you're driving down Route 7 towards Great Barrington and you see Monument Mountain on the right, you'll see like a little landslide that's happening there. That's part of that land that is up for sale right now. It's, as Jess mentioned, it's about it's over 100 years since it last was on the market. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity. It represents a number of natural ecosystems that should be preserved. The land abutting it is currently managed by the state of Massachusetts, by Mass Wildlife. The reason why I'm talking right now is that Mass Wildlife has brought this property to their land committee to help with the acquisition of this property. Mass Wildlife gets about $3 million a year for the acquisition of properties all across Massachusetts.
Yeah.
This property would be a significant chunk of that total budget for the year. The Land Trust, with the good graces of hopefully of the town CPC, will bring in about 20% of what it will cost to purchase that land. The NRC is also going to be bringing in some land, and all I'm asking is that, the determination that the state will be making on this land will happen later this month. And if you can say a word to them, that would be great. It would be great to get the state support. They are a great steward of that land and have been doing a great job around Agawam Lake. I should also just point out that this land is of significant spiritual importance to the Stockbridge Muncie community. Monument Mountain, it's named Monument Mountain for a reason. And we'd like to see that land also not only is conserved, but also provides us with the appropriate cultural easements to give the tribe some opportunities to connect with that land that they haven't had.
Who owns the land now?
It's privately owned by a family, the Swan family, who's been in town, the Swan Butler family, which if you think about pretty much all the different things in town, the Swan Butler family has their name on it pretty much everywhere. And the property just went up for sale in October. And we've been working with
So it's officially on the market now?
It's on the market. We actually have gotten the family to reduce their price by about 20%.
Okay.
And now we're working together to try to get it all funded to acquire it.
So, I mean, several months ago, this was brought to my attention and the DCR, I was working with the DCR. There was no land on the market at that time. So now it's officially on the market. That's good to know. Okay. That's good to know.
It's a negotiation, so,
Okay.
there's a little bit of time is of the essence with the Lands Committee determination at the end of February. I think there's a lot of local support, but when we're contemplating taking, 80% or 90% of the overall statewide budget, that is a big ask, but I do think this is our shot. And besides what the state already owns, which helps raise the criteria for them, if they have adjacent lands they've already protected.
Right.
There is a conservation restriction on 500 acres to the north on private land. And a good portion of the Great Barrington portion is owned by the trustees of reservation, which are also aware and kind of part of the conversation. So it's not just the 350, but this is kind of the last bit for the whole mountain. And so.
But it's contiguous with other protected land.
It's contiguous
which is
with
important.
Monument Mountain.
But who's taking the lead? Is it Fish and Wildlife or is it BNRC taking the lead?
So the NRC, it's basically, we've all been working as equal partners. But at the end of the day, Mass Wildlife has been the one who has the funding or potential funding to be able to help secure that. They have the first right of offer and refusal on the land because of land that we helped, the Land Trust helped them acquire around Agawam Lake back in the mid-90s.
Okay.
So.
Okay.
They also would hold the fee, most likely.
Has it been appraised?
Yes, 2.2 million.
Pete Melanese has been the Mass Wildlife contact.
Is that 2.2, is that an agreed upon?
That is, well, that's the official,
It's the appraised.
that's the appraised value.
I know,
That's
but-
not necessarily the asking.
No, I understand. I mean, appraised and asking are two different numbers, but is there another appraisal happening?
So that appraisal is based off an appraisal that was made in 2019 and then updated for 2022. And the family has agreed with that appraisal.
Oh, okay, good, okay.
The town is, there's a proposal in front of CPC with the thought that, the value of the conservation restriction, as well as some potential private donors would help us bridge some $100,000 if necessary.
Okay.
Between appraisal and, asking.
Okay, great.
And Laurel Hill could potentially, I'm on the board of the Laurel Hill Association, and they could potentially contribute as well.
So one thing, just to give you also a little context, in the past, you mentioned it a little bit, is one of the roles the land trust took with Agawam was when the state was capped at what they could do. The land trust contributed the 40,000. That was the difference between, what the same family, actually, the Swans, Butler family could really wanted to accept and what the state could do. So, there's a lot of partners and ways that we can help all move this forward. But I think it's very important that you guys know that it's very much on the table and trying to move forward.
They're all the local organizations partner very well together.
That's great.
Yeah.
My first term, we bought some old growth forest in Sandusfield, Spectacle Pond.
Yeah.
If we waited for the state to do it, we would have been in trouble. Mass Audubon stepped up in a huge way and actually provided us with a bridge loan to protect the property, and then the state reimbursed Mass Audubon. So I think it could be a patchwork quilt, a little bit of money from the Laurel Hill Society, BNRC, the town. So
that is most likely because of the way the state funding works.
Exactly, that's my point, yeah.
There'll have to be some security.
Yeah, because there was a private developer who wanted to build McMansions down there on Spectacle Pond. I call it Spectacular Pond, it's so beautiful there, but old growth forest. If it wasn't for the Audubon, the developer probably would have won. Yeah.
Thank you both. And just unrelated, school lunch permanent. I love that.
Fantastic. Well, I mean, it's not determined yet. And
No, I'm saying there's a bill. I strongly support that. And that's personal to me. When I was a kid, school lunch was available, but it was not just available to everybody. And you had to show a little card to do it. So those of us that had it didn't go take it because I didn't want anyone to know I was poor. So trying to erase that stigma is extremely important.
So my husband works in the cafeteria. He gave up kind of with COVID and our child being in kindergarten when everything shut down. It was easiest for him to go back into the school system instead of high-end cooking, and she got shut down again. And some of the resources, because everyone has a code now and it's free. There is none of that.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
they went from serving and Moneybrook has the biggest number of children in it because of their early K and pre-K, which, by the way, keeps supporting pre-K. We never got to use it, but it's so critical to have that, especially in our school systems. They went from about 100 to 120 kids with reduced or free lunches, but kids also paying per day, and now they're up to 280.
Yeah.
So that is a huge jump of just, even parents being on the cost, not paying $2 to $4 a day just to have a meal, saves them that little bit. And then when your electricity jumps 3 times, you've got some padding or something. So it's not just kind of the kids who are at the lowest level, but there's a lot of young families who are like, can we do that? Or can my kid play soccer? Or, eat the small stuff. It does add up and matter. So I do think for thinking about affordability of our families, that food is huge. And also just making it easier for a lot of our school districts to accept local produce and farm products. There's so many rules under the COVID.
I was the lead of the HIP bill. That was my...
But COVID, especially on the federal level, made it very restrictive how they could buy, how they tracked food. They weren't being able to accept food from local farmers unless you kind of pretended that it wasn't happening.
Yeah.
So there's just so many ways we can support local agriculture. There's a billion things that are on my mind, but.
Farm to school.
Mm-hmm.
Are you and I on that one?
Probably not.
Yeah, because farm to school, that's another, and I have to give credit to Berkshire Hills Regional School. Years ago, that was an issue by the kids. They had,
Yeah, Project Sprout.
they had the products being grown on the school grounds, but they weren't allowed to bring them into the school cafeteria.
And there's still the same problem. So you have local farmers who would love to sell or donate products. You also have problems that the school, all right, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, because I was on the school
Yeah.
committee back then,
Yeah.
and the thing that really got me was that kids were getting pre-cut apples from Canada in plastic packaging. And they could easily have gotten apples from a dozen orchards around the,
Or the green beans on the front lawn.
yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming and as to hear about the concerns of our region. As you can tell, we're caretakers of our people and land and so many our heritage and things we care about. It's been a while since I've seen you, but I'm Lori Norton Moffett, head of the Norman Rockwell Museum. And I just want to put in a plug for all the great support of the Cultural Facilities Fund, Mass Cultural Council, Community Preservation Fund. This supports so many organizations in our town who drive the jobs and drive the economy of this region. Lennox as well, but this area is so dependent on the creative economy to really drive so many other businesses and help support and lift up all the things that everyone's been talking about today. So thanks for being champions of that. And we just really appreciate all you do, and it's great to have you here.
Thank you. And I want to come take an official tour, and we do gatherings of our colleagues, and I want to bring people to see. That's one of the, before you got here, I mentioned how I never used to have any of the cool stuff, but now I got the Norman Rockwell Museum, I said, so.
I
I'm glad you're
dropped in coffee, and this is great to have a listen to our format, but thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Please.
Can I step forward a little bit?
Indeed.
Thank you for taking us on. I think you were safer up there. I'm Denny Alsop. I live on Main Street in Stockbridge. And it's wonderful to be a member of this amazing community, which all of Berkshire County is. And thank you both for serving us. I appreciate it deeply. My first foray into public service was in the summer of 1968 when I served as a summer volunteer for about 6 weeks. It was after Robert F. Kennedy was killed, and it was a rough time. And my grandfather had gotten word from Don Miller up in Pittsfield, who was on the Eagle, and that something was going on in Lakewood across the river from GE Transformer. And he said, go up and find out what's going on. And so I volunteered for Berkshire Natural Resources Council, which was started by the Millers and Fred Crane with a lot of financing from GE. And George sent me as his representative to the Housatonic Watershed Association, which was then run by Joan Flood. Smitty will remember her. It was an education. There were GE engineers who were on the board, and I was the vote for Berkshire Natural Resources, and it came up a tie vote. So there was no testing done on the river in 1968. And then later on, we found out through various sources that there had been a link between Transformer and a series of deaths in Lakewood. And I won't bore you with the details of how we know that. And then I came back to work in Berkshire County, and there was a SITLA program, which was sort of like picking up young college graduates who were trying to find it was the same problem, trying to bring young people back into the community. And I worked with the elderly with Berkshire Home Care. So when somebody was coming out of a nursing home at BMC or Fairview, they would call me and I would make a home assessment and try and get those people back into their homes. Mm-hmm. And so I dealt with a lot of people on the edge. And I became aware that there were issues where the lower cost housing tended to be pressed into the lower lands. Great Barrington, Housatonic, Stockbridge, Lee, Lennoxdale, and up through the southwest corner of Pittsfield. Smitty knows this territory like the back of his hand. You know, I worked for that for a few years. And then, where am I going with this? School board. I ran for school board. That's right. I was on the school committee, and this was a school land. You know, we are actually standing in the evidence of what we've all been talking about, which is young people no longer being able to grow up here and stuff. And one of the big things that we used to deal with on school board all the time was these IEPs. And you know, my son was able to get an IEP because I come from a family, as I was told, with the money to sue if we didn't get what we wanted. And that was tragic. But there were a lot of people in the district who came along the river who were low income. And their kids ended up on Ritalin. I mean, you could see it. And it was terrible because one of these cases could cost the district $100,000 a year. And we were on the committee, we were between a rock and a hard place. And so slowly over the years, I've been watching the river, you know, and I got involved in the river, as Smitty knows, and went to Boston a couple times and stuff. And I'm really concerned that I'm not going to bring up the dump in Lee or any of that. I know you guys know a lot about that. And oh, by the way, I was the founder of the Housatonic River Initiative in 1991 with Chris Hodgkins. And we did that in Benno Friedman's kitchen in Sheffield, next to the river. And Tim Gray was hired a year or two later, and the rest is history. So I think that the river flowing through Stockbridge, if I just take a look at Stockbridge and not talk about the other communities, there's a lot of illness along the river. I can't really talk about it out of respect for my neighbors, but it was the dog study that Dr. Breslin told me about years ago. He's South Street Veterinary Services, where the canine tumors were being sent to Tufts. And somebody there put a GIS program on the addresses. And in the preliminary report, it showed that 70% of the canine tumors from Pittsfield South were coming from homes with addresses within 200 yards of the river. And so I called up Dr. Moore, who was the guy at Tufts. And he said to me the chilling words, which is that dogs are an indicator species for humans. And so I started to look. And where do I look? I look where the river goes through neighborhoods. There's a complicating factor, which is the railroad, which is also a toxic burden. And I want you to know, I'm not going to talk about the dump. I'm just going to say the cleanup, which has been negotiated over the last umpteen years of the river, isn't going to solve the problem. Essentially, there are reasons why it's not going to solve the problem, which has to do with the repeated flooding of the floodplain, of 9 miles of floodplain. And, you know, EPA has done the best it can do. DEP has, these guys, we have good people there, but GE is tough. And so I went to a birthday party in Stockbridge recently, and the children were young. And I started to notice that they'd come from far away. They had money, they had other income and that kind of thing. And then I realized that they were living in homes along the river where people had died of cancer. And then I thought, oh my gosh, they're bringing young children into Stockbridge, into an environment where those children should not be because of the neurotoxicologic, you know, what happens to a fetus in the womb when they're exposed, when the parents are exposed to these airborne PCBs, which are coming off the river and stuff. So here we are as a town wanting young families to come in here. And we're building, I mean, look at our Pine Woods. So it's built within the floodplain of the Housatonic River. When the river floods, it backs up there. So we're in a tough spot here, and the river is part of it. And I just wanted you to be aware of that and aware that what the cleanup is doing above Woods Pond is building a settling pond. It's a 60-acre by 6-foot deep settling pond to try and catch some of the PCBs before they go over the dam and down to Connecticut, which Connecticut has clout, so they can, you know, they can get us to do this. Connecticut has the same thing with Lake Lilianoa and, you know, down there. They use these large lakes to catch the PCBs to keep them from going into the ocean. But we're exposed. And I just want to bring that up. And thank you very much.
Yeah.
I know you've done a lot of work on this, Smitty, and on your committee and so on and so forth. And now you've got us. Thank you.
Thank you. And I guess the most important thing for me to say is, as I learn new communities, the reason we're here is to make sure you know this is the beginning of the conversation. So now consider me a resource and part of the team and part of the community. So thank you. Last question. Hey! Make it count.
Thanks, everyone. I'm Broker, Old Tree Farm Road. Remember that? Okay?
Not Tree Farm Road, Old
Tree Farm Road.
It's all overgrown. So fairly recently, I got an electric bill. And there's an oversight committee that kind of looks into rate changes and stuff. My bill went from around $200 to $500 in a month. I didn't add anything. Nothing's changed. accept the rate. I know that there are options out there for change. There's different carriers, you can do this. You could go with solar. If I go with solar, I gotta cut down trees. I'm not cutting down trees. Old tree farm. So my options are trying to negotiate with some of these other carriers. But the oversight, there's a lot of people out there that aren't gonna realize that 100% plus increase is right. Where are all these wind stations and solar panels, and where does that electricity go? There should be a surplus of electricity in the Northeast now. Well, maybe not the whole Northeast, but there should be a surplus. How can, and the price of propane's going down again. How do they justify 100 and some percent increase when nothing's changed? I can go with, I guess it's the different carriers. So there's an oversight. Who looks at this stuff? Who says why? There can't possibly be that kind of justification to go from $200 to $500.
Yeah.
I don't know if your bills have gone up. Look at them close. They probably.
No, we're exempt.
I know what he lives in. I don't have a cord, but this is not an uncommon thing, and not in this town anyways. I don't know about other towns.
Is your house electric heat, Ronnie?
No.
And it goes from $200 to $500?
Yes.
For 1 month?
Yes.
And it's not electric heat?
No.
I think Mike can speak to this one.
Yeah, well, so Stockbridge is just part of National Grid Basic Service. There's no other programs. So under that, the rate went from roughly 11 cents to 33 cents by National Grid. Of course, that's the requirement. The National Grid goes out on a single day, gets their bids required by law. And when they went out was at the absolute worst time possible. And then that's the rate that National Grid has for the next 6 months.
I do.
And unfortunately, we weren't part of the collaborative Stockbridge officials when there was a regional collaborative that was formed. And actually, Mike organized it from his roost in North Adams.
Yep.
And at that time, Stockbridge officials chose not to take part in it. Yeah. So.
How much of a difference would that have made if they did?
Well, it's what you're paying in Lennox now at 99.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I just cut mine in half, my kilowatt per hour price in half by switching to a different provider. But of course, we would have been better off if we'd been ahead on that one.
The DPU has to go back to Ronnie's comment, who's supposed to oversee this? It's the Department of Public Utilities. And that's been an ongoing issue for a long time. I think the new governor has a chance to
make a big difference. Yeah.
Get rid of the DPU commissioners, whatever the hell they're called, and start over. But I think they should be more justification on the rate request increases. And I think they've just been historically rubber stamps. So to go from $200 to $500. I mean, whether you're part of a collaborative or not, that's just wrong. That's just wrong.
The two of us with Rep. Barrett sent a letter that I think 100 legislators signed on to, demanding that they reconsider how they allowed the rates to go up and consider the fact that gas and propane have been coming down. Yes. They did start a study before the lead commissioner quit the board because he was a appointee of the previous administration. So in the short term, the legislature is demanding that something happen and happen quickly that reflects the reality. There's also a bill that me and Rep. Barrett filed that Smitty supports to put more teeth into how they operate, put more teeth into how they let the rates go. Years ago, we passed this bill about healthcare cost containment, that if your costs are going to go up bigger than the rate of inflation, you have to justify why. So extending this to these electric companies as well, and making them not count in their cost that requests a price increase lobbyists that they send to the State House and advertising that they do about how great they are for the community and all that kind of stuff that really we shouldn't be paying for them to advertise because there's nowhere else we can go. It's not like they're a competitive service with the 18 sets of phone electric lines I see running down the street. I think there's only one. And then also with the wind. So a bill we passed last year is to try to make Massachusetts kind of the hub of offshore wind, maybe for the world, if not the country. They compare it to like the Fort Knox of offshore wind. And when that happens, it's going to be jobs in the generation, but it's going to hopefully get us to this point where we are energy independent, because everything you're mentioning is right. Why are we so reliant on the price of gas and natural gas if we're doing all this effort to make ourselves sustainable and green? And that's going to take a little bit longer, but there are actions we're trying to take in the short, medium, and long term to change this, because it's gone on too long. And someone from Pittsfield asked me, like, their developer, how can I ask people to move here when the energy costs are so high? And they're not wrong. So we're
And it
trying.
costs $7,000 for every electric pole to put in.
To put in a new one, yeah.
Which is just ridiculous.
Yeah.
In my opinion, we give the incentives to the wrong people.
Yeah.
You know, that solar array on Silver Lake in Pittsfield, it was the largest at that time in the entire state. Never saw my electric bill go down. We're rewarding the companies to install them. I'd rather reward you if you can put solar on your house or do a heat pump in your house. So the payback is not 7 or 8 years, it's 3 or 4 years. And then it's money in your wallet. I'd rather give you the incentive than give it to National Grid or Eversource or anybody else. We're giving the money to the wrong people, because I don't see any benefit. Every time you turn on the news about a windmill or a solar array will heat 40,000 houses. When's mine gonna be one? And it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen.
I'd like to thank the senator and representative.
Thank you. Thank you, Patrick, for putting this together and suggesting it. You got in early on the rotation, and I really appreciate it. And this mug will be in the State House.
All right.
On display. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.